I've always been drawn to urban exploration, to the beauty of decay. For me, abandoned buildings weren't just empty shells. They were time capsules, each one holding 1,000 silent stories. My holy grail had always been Blackwood Pines Sanatorium, a colossal, bat-winged asylum on the outskirts of town that had been shuttered since the late 1970s. Legends clung to it like the ivy on its brick walls, tales of cruel doctors, forgotten patients, and shadows that moved in the empty wards. It was fenced off and patrolled, but after weeks of scouting, my friend Liam and I found a weak spot in the perimeter, a place where the woods pressed right up against a crumbling section of wall. We chose a moonless night in early November to make our move. The air was cold and crisp, carrying the scent of dead leaves and damp earth. Armed with high-powered flashlights, a camera, and a healthy dose of nervous excitement, we slipped through the fence just after fun a.m. Standing at the foot of the main building, I felt a wave of awe and trepidation. It was a monster of a place, a dark silhouette against the starless sky, its hundreds of windows like vacant eyes staring down at us. We found our entry point, a boarded-up window in what looked like a ground-floor kitchen, where the plywood was rotting and loose. With a bit of effort, we pried it open and slipped inside, our boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The air inside was thick and stagnant, heavy with the smell of dust, mildew, and something else, a faint, antiseptic scent that seemed to linger after 40 years of disuse. Our flashlight beams cut through the oppressive darkness, revealing a cavernous kitchen. Rusted stainless steel counters lined the walls, and a massive, overturned soup kettle lay in the center of the room like a fallen meteorite. We moved carefully, our senses on high alert. The only sounds were our own hushed breaths and the scuttling of unseen things in the walls. Our plan was to explore the administrative wing first, then work our way up to the infamous third-floor ward, where the most severe cases were allegedly housed. We found the main hallway, its checkered linoleum floor buckled and cracked. Doors stood ajar on either side, leading into dark, empty offices. Papers were strewn everywhere, patient files and medical charts turned to brittle, yellowed confetti by time and moisture. It was here, as I was panning my light across a wall of peeling paint, that I heard the first thing that was truly out of place. It was a faint sound, coming from deep within the building from one of the upper floors. It was a soft, metallic scrape. Liam froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart starting a low, heavy drumbeat in my chest. We stood in perfect silence, straining our ears. The sound didn't repeat. We rationalized it away. An animal, the wind pushing a loose piece of metal, the old building settling. It had to be. We were alone in here. We pressed on, moving up a grand, sweeping staircase, its wooden banister thick with dust. On the second floor was the children's ward. This was the part of the asylum that always hit the hardest. Small rusted beds were lined up in neat rows and faded, peeling murals of cartoon animals decorated the walls. A single, solitary tricycle sat in the middle of the floor, its front wheel turned as if its rider had just dismounted. The feeling of profound sadness in that ward was suffocating. As Liam was setting up a shot with his camera, the sound came again. This time it was clearer, closer. It was the distinct sound of a child's giggle. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It echoed down the long, dark hallway from the direction of the third floor. My blood ran cold. Liam's face had gone pale in the beam of his headlamp. "That's not the wind," he breathed, his voice trembling. "No," I agreed, my own voice barely a whisper. All logic, all rational explanations evaporated in that moment. We were not alone. My bravado from earlier had completely vanished, replaced by a primal fear that was cold and sharp. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get out. But the explorer in me, the part that craved the story, was stronger. "We have to see," I said, my words sounding far braver than I felt. We began to move towards the stairwell that led to the third floor, our steps now slow and deliberate, our flashlights sweeping every dark corner. The third floor was different. The air was colder, the decay more profound. The hallway was narrower, the doors made of heavy steel with small, barred windows. This was the isolation wing. We moved down the corridor, shining our lights into the small, empty cells. They were barren, just a concrete slab for a bed and scratches on the walls. As we reached the midway point of the hall, the giggle came again. It wasn't distant anymore. It sounded like it was just around the corner, at the far end of the hallway. It was followed by another sound, one that made the hair on my arms stand up, the gentle, rhythmic creak, creak, creak of a rocking chair. We crept forward, our hearts hammering against our ribs. We reached the end of the hall, which opened into a larger common area. In the center of the room, our flashlight beams converged on a single object, an old, wooden rocking chair, slowly, gently rocking back and forth on its own. The giggling had stopped. There was only the sound of the chair's methodical creaking. It was impossible. There was no draft, no slope in the floor. It moved with a deliberate, steady rhythm. We stood mesmerized, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and disbelief. Liam raised his camera, his hands shaking. As the camera's flash went off, a high-pitched shriek erupted from the darkness just behind the chair. It was a sound of pure, undiluted agony and rage, a sound that bypassed the ears and drilled straight into the soul. We both screamed, stumbling backward. In the split second of the flash, my eyes had registered something, a small, dark shape huddled on the floor behind the chair, something unnaturally thin and contorted. Before we could process it, a metal bedpan flew out of the darkness, clanging violently against the wall just inches from my head. Then another object, a rusted mug, hurtled past Liam's ear. We didn't wait to see what was next. We turned and ran. We sprinted down the hallway, the sound of that terrible shriek chasing us, echoing off the tiled walls. We scrambled down the stairs, tripping and falling in our haste, fueled by pure adrenaline. We burst back into the main hallway, our only thought to get to the kitchen window, to get out. As we ran, the sound of the child's giggling started again, but it was different now. It was no longer distant or playful. It was malicious, distorted, and it seemed to come from all around us at once, as if the very walls of Blackwood Pines were laughing at our terror. We practically threw ourselves through the window, not caring about the splintered wood or sharp edges. We landed in the dirt outside, scrambling to our feet and running without looking back. We didn't stop until we were back at the car, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling uncontrollably. We drove away, the dark silhouette of the asylum shrinking in the rearview mirror. I never went to urban exploration again. The memory is seared into my mind, the echo of that giggle, the sight of that empty rocking chair, and the soul-shattering shriek from the darkness. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can still hear it. That faint, malicious laughter, a chilling reminder that some places are best left abandoned, and some stories are best left untold. For 2 years during my nursing degree, I worked weekends as a certified nursing assistant at St. Jude's Geriatric and Psychiatric Care Center. It was an old hospital, the kind of place built in the 1950s with long, sterile hallways, flickering fluorescent lights, and a persistent smell of bleach and despair. I was assigned to the long-term care wing on the second floor, a place for patients who were, for all intents and purposes, forgotten by the outside world. It was a challenging job, both physically and emotionally, but I loved the residents. I learned their stories, their quirks, their routines. It was a predictable, if sometimes somber, environment. My routine on the night shift was always the same. I'd arrive at 11 p.m., get the report from the evening nurse, and then begin my rounds. Most of the patients were asleep by then, so my duties mainly consisted of checking vitals, repositioning those who couldn't move themselves, and charting. The hallway was usually quiet, punctuated only by the hum of the ice machine, the distant beep of a heart monitor, or the occasional soft moan from a restless sleeper. I'd grown accustomed to the sounds, to the kind of silence that inhabits a hospital at 3 a.m. About 6 months into the job, a new patient was admitted to room 217 at the far end of the hall. His name was Mr. Gable. He was an elderly man, probably in his late 80s, brought in from another facility that had closed. His chart was thin, listing him as nonverbal due to a severe stroke year prior. He was frail, bed-bound, and required total care. But what was most striking about him were his eyes. They were a pale, watery blue, and they were always wide, always alert, and always fixed on one specific spot in his room, the top corner, where the wall met the ceiling, directly across from his bed. He would stare at that corner for hours, his expression a mixture of intense concentration and what I could only describe as profound fear. The first time I noticed something truly strange was during my second week with him. I was in his room around 2 a.m., changing his linens. The room was silent, except for the soft rustle of the sheets. As I leaned over his bed, near the wall he always stared at, I heard a faint sound. It was a whisper, a dry, sibilant hiss so soft I thought I'd imagined it. It sounded like air escaping a pinhole in a tire. I froze, listening intently. It was gone. I chalked it up to the building's old, rattling HVAC system. The hospital was full of strange noises. I finished my work and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Mr. Gable's eyes followed me out of the room, then immediately snapped back to that empty corner. The whispers became a regular occurrence, but only when I was in room 217, and only when I was near that specific corner. They were never clear enough to make out words, just a series of soft, overlapping hisses and clicks, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I mentioned it once to another nurse, a veteran named Carol. She just gave me a tired smile and said, "This old place plays tricks on you, honey, especially on the night shift." I tried to believe her. I tried to rationalize that I was just tired, that the long hours and the inherent stress of the job were making me imagine things. But then Mr. Gable's behavior started to change. He became more agitated. During the day, the other staff reported he was docile. But at night, with me, he was different. He would begin to tremble whenever I entered the room. His breathing would become shallow and rapid, and sometimes he would make these low, guttural moans deep in his throat, his eyes still locked on that corner, wide with terror. He was trying to warn me, I realized. He was trying to tell me something, but the words were trapped inside him. The whispers in the corner grew more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes, I'd get the distinct feeling of being watched. A cold spot would form in that corner of the room, and the fine hairs on my arms would stand on end. I started to dread doing my rounds, my heart pounding every time I had to push open the door to room 217. The breaking point came on a cold, rainy Thursday night. The hospital was unusually quiet, the storm outside muffling the usual city sounds. I was short-staffed, the other CNA had called in sick. It was just me and the charge nurse, who was busy with paperwork at the main station. It was my job to do the final rounds alone. I saved room 217 for last, my stomach churning with anxiety. As I pushed open the door, a wave of unnatural cold washed over me. The room felt like a freezer. Mr. Gable was awake, his body rigid in the bed, his knuckles white as he gripped the bed rails. His eyes were wider than I'd ever seen them, and they were darting frantically between me and the corner. As I stepped further into the room, the whispers started. But this time, they were different. They were louder, clearer, and they were coming from all around me. A cacophony of dry, hissing voices, overlapping, intertwining, speaking in a language I didn't understand, but the malice, the hatred was universal. I froze, my hand on the back of a chair, my entire body trembling. I couldn't move. The cold was so intense it felt like it was seeping into my bones, making my teeth chatter. The voices grew louder, swirling around the room, seeming to converge on that one dark corner. And then Mr. Gable sat bolt upright in his bed. It was a movement that should have been impossible for him. His chart said he had almost no motor function, but he sat there, his frail body straight as a board, his head turned towards me. His mouth, which had been slack and unresponsive for years, slowly opened. I expected a moan, a cry, but what came out was not his voice. It was a chorus of voices, the same dry, hissing voices from the corner, speaking in perfect, chilling unison from his lips. "You should not be here," they rasped. "He is ours, and we are hungry." A scream lodged in my throat. His pale blue eyes were gone, replaced by tubes of absolute blackness. His face was contorted into a snarl that was utterly inhuman. The chorus of voices laughed, a sound like grinding stones and breaking glass, and the lights in the room flickered violently before going out completely, plunging us into darkness. I could hear him scrambling out of the bed. the sound of his thin hospital gown rustling, the soft, wet padding of bare feet on the linoleum floor. He was coming for me. I finally found my voice and screamed. I turned and fled, fumbling for the door in the pitch black, the sound of that horrible, unified laughter echoing behind me. I burst out into the hallway, slamming the door shut, and didn't stop running until I crashed into the nursing station, gasping and sobbing. The charged nurse looked up, her eyes wide with alarm. The lights in the hallway were still on. The lights in every room were still on, except for room 217. Its doorway was a rectangle of impenetrable darkness. We called security, and when they finally managed to force the door open and restore the power, they found Mr. Gable lying peacefully in his bed, as if nothing had happened. His breathing was even, his eyes were closed. But when I looked at the corner of the room, the wall was covered in long, deep scratches, as if something with immense strength and sharp claws had been trying to claw its way out. Mr. Gable passed away in his sleep 2 days later. I put in my 2 weeks notice the next morning. I couldn't stay there, couldn't walk past that room. And even now, years later, in the dead of night, I sometimes hear a faint, dry whisper, and I see those two black, empty eyes, and I hear those voices telling me they are hungry. I've been in the demolition business for over 20 years, and in that time, I've torn down everything from old factories to suburban homes. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the job we took on in the fall of 2009, the razing of the old Penhurst State Asylum. The place was a ruin, a sprawling campus of decaying brick buildings that had been left to rot for decades. It had a dark history, one of neglect and abuse, and you could feel it in the air. The project was massive, slated to take the better part of a year. My crew and I were assigned to the West Wing, one of the oldest and most dilapidated structures on the property. From day one, the place felt wrong. It wasn't just the creepy atmosphere. Strange things started happening almost immediately. Tools would vanish from where we'd left them, only to reappear in a completely different part of the building. We'd hear doors slam in distant, empty hallways. Cold spots were everywhere, so intense that you could see your breath, even on a warm day. The guys were all on edge, telling stories of seeing fleeting shapes out of the corners of their eyes or hearing faint, disembodied voices on the wind. We were all tough, seasoned guys, not easily spooked, but Penhurst was different. It felt like the building itself was alive, and that it didn't want us there. The real trouble started when we began work in the basement. According to the original blueprints, the basement was just a series of boiler rooms and storage closets. But as we were clearing out debris, my foreman, Dave, noticed something odd about the far northern wall. It was made of newer brick, a different color and texture from the rest of the foundation. It wasn't on the plans. Curiosity got the better of us. We were convinced it was sealing off a forgotten section. After a heated discussion with the site manager, we were given the green light to punch through it. We were demolition guys, after all. Making holes in things was our specialty. As soon as the first sledgehammer hit the brick, a wave of frigid air washed over us, carrying a foul, stagnant smell like old water and decay. It was so cold it felt like walking into a meat locker. We continued our work, the sense of dread growing with every brick we removed. It was in the sudden quiet between hammer swings that we first heard it. A faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It was coming from behind the wall we were breaking down. We all froze, looking at each other. It couldn't be. The wing had been sealed for decades. Probably just a pipe, Dave said, but his voice lacked conviction. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate, like a metronome. The sound spurred us on, a grim sense of purpose now mixed with our fear. What if someone was in there? It seemed impossible, but we had to know. We worked faster, tearing down the wall with crowbars and hammers. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, as we got closer. It was like whatever was on the other side could hear us, and it was desperate to get out. Finally, with one last heave, we pulled down a large section of the wall, creating an opening big enough to shine our work lights through. The tapping stopped. The room beyond was small, no bigger than a closet, and it was empty. There were no pipes, no machinery. The floor was bare concrete, and the walls were solid stone. But the walls, they were covered, from floor to ceiling, in scratches. It wasn't random graffiti. It was a single phrase, repeated over and over, thousands of times, carved into the stone with what must have been fingernails. My light traced over the words, Elitim Ian. My stomach twisted into a knot. Not, let me out. Let me in. Who would scratch that on the inside of a sealed room? We stood there in stunned silence, the beams of our flashlights dancing over the horrifyingly repetitive text. The air in the small room was colder than anything I'd ever felt, a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to sap all the warmth from your body. What the hell is this? One of my crew members, a young guy named Ricky, whispered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the single, bare bulb that we had strung into the basement flickered and went out, plunging us into near total darkness, save for our headlamps. And then the tapping started again. But this time, it wasn't coming from one spot. It was coming from everywhere. From the wall in front of us, from the walls on either side, from the ceiling above, even from the concrete floor beneath our feet. Tap, 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 1,000 tiny, frantic raps surrounding us, closing in. It was the sound of 1,000 desperate fingers, all scratching, all tapping, all trying to get in. Panic erupted. We scrambled backward, tripping over each other in the dark, trying to get away from that horrifying room. As we stumbled back into the main part of the basement, a deep, groaning sound echoed from above us, the sound of stressed, ancient concrete. The whole wing seemed to shudder. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The vibrations from our demolition, combined with whatever presence was in that room, had compromised the building's integrity. Dave screamed. We ran for the exit, the sound of the tapping now drowned out by the roar of collapsing infrastructure. I was the last one out. I threw myself through the doorway just as the main support beam gave way, and the entire west wing folded in on itself with a deafening, final roar, sending up a massive cloud of dust and debris that blotted out the sun. When the dust finally settled, there was just a pile of rubble where the wing had been. I was alive, but Dave and Ricky, they didn't make it out. The official report called it a tragic structural failure, a risk of the job, but I know what happened. We let something out that day, or rather, we opened a door that something desperately wanted to come through. I quit the business a week later. I couldn't set foot on another demolition site, and even today, a decade later, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I'll sometimes hear it. A faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from inside the walls, a horrifying reminder of the day we found a room that wanted something in.